So, in this first video for my YouTube channel that I'm going to be doing, this will be a short sort of idea of the best things you can do to start painting, get started in the hobby. Obviously you can see I've got quite a lot of stuff in the background, so I'd say I've got quite a lot of experience on what works, what out of this would I use the most, and you know what you should buy. And then later on in the video I'll explain the sort of stuff you don't need as you start off the hobby, but later down the line you'll go, oh, I could really do with that right now, and you'd be happy to have it. Stuff like inks and that sort of thing, where definitely not for beginners, but later down the line they can come really in handy. So for the first stuff, obviously it's got to be brushes. I've got a fair few that I've collected over the years. Some more dodgy, like not dodgy, but just ones you wouldn't want to use for really painting much off Amazon that are really cheap. Some of the more expensive stuff, and obviously I've got my airbrush needles in there. So first of all, I would say if I can find the brush, you should always have at least one or two, or a couple of really good brushes that you want to keep these in really good condition. Whereas obviously I've got this one, which is the less good quality ones, and here I've got a variety of stuff that is ranging from very expensive brushes to sort of the less expensive, but I still use them really frequently, so I want to keep them in good quality. So obviously, first of all, I've got some Element Games. These brushes are quite good quality. Great for most stuff that I want to do it for. When I've got the really, really good details and stuff I really want high quality stuff on, I've got my Winsor and Newton stuff, which are the really expensive brushes. And then in here, obviously, I've got a dry brush. Again, very, very useful. This one from AK, I got it and I absolutely love it. I've been using it on pretty much everything since I bought it, and it's, the fat dry brushes are really where you want to go with. And where are my small ones? I've got the Army Painter sort of really, really detailed ones, which are, as you can see, for the smaller stuff. And then I've also got the Insane Detail one. Well, that's Insane Detail. There's the Psycho. Where's that one? Yeah, but I've got the Psycho one, which is, you want to use it for painting eyes and stuff like that. But essentially, you want a couple of really good brushes for the high detail stuff where you don't really make mistakes. And then I've got sort of just an amalgamation of just shit, which, for that I use for painting diorama sort of sides and stuff like that. Mixing paint as well. That I use for stripping paint because it's good to get clean stuff. A lot of these I just use for mixing paint or cleaning my airbrush, honestly, now. And actually, that is another really useful tool for basing, so that should be in the good pot. And I've also got some sculpting tools that I bought off Amazon, but they're not very good because they come apart when you push on them, so, I don't use those too much. And for some reason, there's a pencil in here. But there's a lot of brushes in here that are just sort of, I'd use them for stuff that I don't care about, sort of like dry brushes, mixing paints, all that sort of thing, where you're not really going to worry about the fact it's frayed or anything. And so, number two, obviously, glues. Plastic glue for your miniatures. Obviously, I've got the Citadel plastic glue. It's what I've had since I started the hobby sort of 10 years ago. It's polystyrene-based plastic, so this melts it down and binds it together. Obviously, very useful. Super glue, which is, again, very, very useful. I believe they're used for resin models and stuff like that. I also use it for basing, like sticking down cork. It dries quick. And then PVA. PVA is another great thing for basing. Obviously, it's a lot more liquidy, hell of a lot less toxic than this. There's been times where I've used so much of this stuff, honestly, I need to leave this room for an hour because it just, just too much super glue. Well ventilated room, I'm sure you've heard it all before. This stuff is all very, don't eat it, basically. However, PVA, if you're feeling peckish, I don't advise it. But I have seen people scran it before, but don't do it. But there are YouTubers who have. I'm sure you may know who I'm talking about if you're in the old sort of Max Mofo scene. But yeah, PVA, very, very good for basing. You can just cover it all in a base, stick some sand on, and PVA will do it. It just does take a little bit longer to dry than super glue. And then, of course, hand in hand with glue, you've got your sprue snippers. I don't think they do these ones anymore. I've had these, I think these were like the ones I got when I started the hobby. If you're just starting out, I've been the person who wings it and just uses a hobby knife. You get by with what you can because it's in the house. Probably the best investment you can get is one of these, because it just allows you to remove it without having to worry about ruining the miniature. And the parts, especially when it comes to smaller ones, I like these because they're a lot more detailed than this version of the Citadel ones. However, these ones are a bit stronger. Obviously, you've got a bit more leverage because they're longer. But yeah, pretty much essentials. You know, you couldn't do this to do the hobby without these. Or if you were, you're probably damaging the miniatures before you get them off the sprue. And then, of course, another really important thing, files and a hobby knife. Files are very, very good. You know, every time you snip something off with the snippers, as I demonstrated there, you're going to have little bits of plastic sort of sticking off. File it down, and it gives you a bit of a smoother look. These do come in handy. Again, I'd say you probably can't live without them. I bought these from the Games Workshop ones. They're not my favourite files. They do feel like they don't do much once they've been used a few times. However, I do have some actual metalwork files. This is a really fine one, and I've been using this since, I think, you know, my mum gave me these when I was, I think, like, you know, 15 to do Warhammer with, and, well, they've been the thing that I use all the time, so clearly I'm doing something right with it. And then obviously, a very key part, the hobby knife. Obviously, I've got myself a cutting mat here. Cutting mats are nice. You don't really need them. Just, if you're going to cut stuff, don't do it onto a table you care about. I've got this area specifically for hobbying, so I can do that and I don't care. I mean, there's paint everywhere on it, so this is my hobby area. If I cut the table, that's what it's there for. But yeah, you use these mold line removing, cutting stuff for dioramas. Sometimes, if you want a fine point that you don't worry about it's getting dirty, give it a poke. You know, they're useful tools. And obviously, this is the one I've got, a very cheap one off Amazon, but it's done me well. And you can remove the blades, so I've got a load of replacements as well, so you don't have to worry about, you know, blunting them and stuff like that. And if I could do it up properly, there we go. You know, there we go. It's got a lid, so don't stab yourself. But yeah, knife sort of control is very important. Surprisingly, actually, I haven't cut myself. Oftentimes, I'm cutting like stuff like that directly into my thumb. There you go. You can see probably where I've done that there. But with enough knife control, you know, you shouldn't be hurting yourself there. But it's a learned thing, so careful with it. But you know, you make mistakes, you learn from them. Next time you use it, you won't cut yourself, basically. Another very, very important thing if you're doing the hobby and starting out, base coating. You do it for every model. You should be doing it for every model. Painting directly onto the plastic is not ideal. Obviously, cans, very accessible. GW sell them. Pretty much every other place does as well. I've got that because I did have an Ultramarines army, but now I just paint whatever, so I don't really use this at all. But spray things, if you don't have an airbrush, this is what you use. Build your miniatures, chuck them on like a stick and line them up with blue tack, and you can spray your whole squad you've just built. Prime it the colour that you want. I'd advise black. This I'm not, I sort of wish I hadn't done. Now I know more about painting, but black is the best thing you can do. I've got the airbrush surface primer that I use for priming every single miniature. I either use that one or the white. Most of the time it's the black one, of course. But the spray can's very, very accessible, so you can buy it from your hobby shop when you buy your first kit. Getting into the hobby's pretty expensive, but these I think are about £8 if I remember correctly. But GW have been increasing their prices recently, so I'll try and chuck prices on screen for each of the things I'm popping up. So the next thing I'll be going through here, paints. Pretty obvious that you're going to need them if you want an army that doesn't look like grey. I think, you know, a pretty common thing within the hobby is the fact that no one paints their miniatures, because you get loads, building them is really fun, painting them takes ages, so you paint 3 and the other 7 members just go unpainted. Case in point, I've got a Kroot there, not finished. I've got Kairos there, not finished. And I've got a box somewhere, not finished. Here's a Kroot, not finished. Here's a Space Marine, not finished. That's Kairos' arm, haven't started. A base, not finished. Miniature, not finished. The Witcher, not finished. And I got that years ago. What else do I have? A base that I started, not finished. Basically, it's a very common thing. So paints are going to be something you need. And obviously in regards to paints, Vallejo are very, very good. these bottles are something you probably want to look out for if you have a palette. Palettes are pretty important things. Obviously, you know, you want a place so that you can mess around with your paint, water it down, get it to the consistency you want to use, and then obviously mix it, water it down, and have a place to use it. The great accessible thing about the Citadel paints, obviously everyone hates the Citadel pots. Like, if you're in the painting community, you know these are not the best pots to use because they're not, you know, it just needs to get messy. I mean, you can see how bad it is. It just goes around the sides and stuff like that. However, the great thing about this, which I think a lot of people fail to see, is that if you're starting a miniature and painting a miniature, you're not going to have a palette to start off with. You're going to buy a paint, you're going to buy a box, and you're going to go, oh, I want to start. The great thing about these is when you open them, they've basically got their own little palette you can use there. Admittedly, it's not, obviously watering down paints and like thinning it, it's not an advanced technique, but it's something that a beginner isn't going to think of. So you can just dunk your paintbrush in there, that's where you get your paint from, it's all done. However, with these, it's not a great example because the top of it is messy. You can't dunk your paintbrush into the top of that. You could take it off, but I mean, you don't really want to do that every time. Whereas with this, you dunk it in the lid, there you go, you got some paint on your brush, you paint with it, and you keep going back to it. This is, you know, a very beginner-friendly paint pot. However, keeping the lid clean, as you can see, is not the easiest. They get stuck around there, which is where the parts that people don't like come in, but they're very beginner-friendly paints. When you get to having a palette, like I have under this bit of cardboard, there, which I'll showcase in just a moment, the dropper bottles become a lot more useful because you can drop it onto the palette, you drop as much as you want, so you're not wasting any paint. You know, you give it a little drop out, nothing comes out if you hold it upside down, with this one at least, before I get in trouble for having a liquid paint doing that. And you're good to go. So paints are very, very, you know, good to have. These Vallejo ones I've been using since I got them, and I haven't stopped. Fluorescent paints, again, not really something you're ever going to use as a beginner because they're, again, not horrendously advanced techniques, but just not something that you're really going to have to worry about if you're just painting sort of starting out. Inks, however, can be very useful. So if you're going somewhere that can do a bundle of paints, see if you can get a couple of inks in. Green would not be the ink I recommend. Depending on your army, salamanders, green might be great. White ink, which I have got this, which I got off Amazon, the Liquitex White, brilliant for sort of highlighting stuff, and it runs into the recesses quite well, so you can use it quite well for glows and things like that, which is where the inks come in pretty handy. But as I said, fluorescent ones are just not something you're really going to look at until you're later down the line. Inks, however, brilliant. And then obviously you get your standard ones. Usually because of the Games Workshop sort of base layer and stuff like that, they can all be used for whatever. The reason they're bases and layers, I believe, is just because some of them are thicker than others, so they go on better. But if you thin your paint, suddenly it's a layer paint. It's really just to do with the consistency. And now for quite possibly the thing I use the most, it's a palette. Surprise, surprise. You know, you never ever go without one really that you use every time because it's where you put your paints to mix them. Usually this has a bit of like special paper. I think you can use greaseproof on top of this foam bit, and then, you know, it keeps your paint wet so that it's not drying out depending on the temperature and humidity of your room. It can dry at different rates. I know mine makes stuff dry very, very quickly and it's a bit of a pain. These aren't horrendously expensive, but again, if you're just starting out, it may not be the first thing you think to buy. Games Workshop, I don't think even sell them. However, Games Workshop do sell these. I think so, at least. I mean, obviously I got the Citadel one, so clearly they did sell it at one point at least. But these are just bits of sort of, I don't want to say shiny, but, you know, shiny card that doesn't soak up paint, but, you know, allows you to mix it and stuff like that. Great starting out palette, however, it's not something you're going to be able to clean because it is, I mean, it's designed as a, please come back and buy some more. However, I've only ever used a few pages. If you're just starting out, a tile, just a standard kitchen tile, can be really, really useful because all you need to do is get a tile. They're designed to be waterproof, so that you will be able to scrape paint off them. I don't have a tile to hand, obviously, because I've got wet palette, so I've been using that since I got it. And probably the very last of the absolute essentials would be, of course, the water pot. I've got the Citadel one. I like that it has lines across the bottom. It allows you to break up the paint on the tip of your brush. It's quite useful. Obviously, you can just use a mug, whatever. It all sort of works. But yeah, you need something to wash your paintbrushes. Otherwise, you know, they just won't be good brushes as soon as you've used them. So, water pot, incredibly important. And now moving on to sort of the more important, well, I say more important, but you know, the next things you want to use for your painting. Of course, brush upkeep stuff. I've got brush soap and a brush restorer. I don't know if this is like a superstition that I have, but I usually dip it in the brush restorer, use the brush restorer to moisten up the brush soap, whip it round, get it into a nice point, and then let it dry on the brush, or wash it a few times, then let the brush soap dry on the brush and leave it in a point so that it can dry and, you know, solidify in the bristles to make sure that the bristles and everything stay straight. Useful to have. I don't think they're very expensive. I'll try and chuck an Amazon price up, or whatever price I find on the screen. But again, useful to have. I wouldn't say, as long as you're good at sort of keeping your brushes in good quality, they're not really necessary, but they're helpful. And I would recommend getting them at some point if you can. And now, we've got the hand drill. This is great for pinning models to bases. Really not necessary if you're just going for like standard circular bases, like this guy here. If you're going to go on a standard circular base, you know, plastic glue is probably fine. And I probably should have done this one a little bit sooner. The painting handle. I don't paint without it, basically, except from him, because his base is too big. It's amazing. I've got the Citadel one. Obviously, there are other options. In fact, I've got two of them, because it's useful to have, you know, this is the model I'm painting, this is the other model I'm painting. There they are, standing up. I'm not going to lose them. However, if you can see, it means you can hold, I mean, I'm right-handed, so if you hold the model, you can hold it like that, steady your hand against your own hand and stuff like that. If you've got a really big detail there, in fact, I can probably demonstrate with a paintbrush. You know, if you hold it, I usually, you sort of know where you're going to hold it when you are holding it as to which is going to be easiest for you. Oftentimes I'm holding it like this. You know, rest your own hand on your hand, steady yourself on your table, and you can paint stuff a lot steadier, and you're not holding it really close to the base because there's not a lot to grip onto. And if you want to paint stuff upside down, I hold it like this. Steady the plastic edge bit there. Well, he's not the best model to do it because he's a bit sticky outy, but if I rotate him, and I can steady the model on my hand, and it makes it a lot easier to paint these pieces and any sort of areas you want to get to. It makes for great just accessibility for the whole model, and I really, really do enjoy you having this. I probably should have put it earlier in the video, but again, it's not something you really, really need, and you can make it out of like a bit of wood and some blue tack. These are just a bit easier, and you're not faffing about with blue tack because you can just, you know, put it in, take it off, if I could do it properly. And there it is. Now, this tool is probably more niche. Something that every painter, if you're going to get serious about painting your models and doing it properly, you should get an airbrush at some point. You can get really, really cheap ones, and they're great for basing your miniatures. It's cheaper than doing it with a can every time. You know, £10 a can, I think, you know, I think they're £10.50 now, if I'm not mistaken. I'll check the price on the screen of what cans are. I think, you know, I did it earlier with this guy. But they're really useful. I've got the Evolution CR Plus. I've had it since I started the hobby. And to be honest, it's probably a better quality airbrush than I should have started with. Because, I mean, I used it to get the green done on this guy. So this guy is, he's been done with the airbrush. So I primed him in black, as you can see with the cloak, and then did the green pieces, which is what is the dark part of his skin is going to look like. And it just allows you to prime what you want to prime in the colour that you want it done. So obviously the cloak ain't going to be green, so I've not airbrushed that green. There is some overspill, but it's not too bad, and you know, it's a lot better than just priming the whole thing green and then trying to go in other places. Really useful tool, even if you just get a bad one for basing. I think Squidmar has done a very good comprehensive video on these. Obviously Squidmar's a pretty big name in the hobby, but airbrushes are brilliant. Squidmar recommends you get a cheap one, even if you start out the hobby, and I'd say the same. Get a cheap one, even if it's just for basing. It's just a useful tool to have. And you can get kits that come with air compressors and everything. That's what I got. I don't know exactly how much I paid for this. I think it was probably about £200 to £300, but because it came with an air compressor, this whatever it's called, like pot that you can mount the airbrush in and clean it with. I use it literally every time I airbrush. As you can see, it's fairly well weathered. And obviously this one came with another pot to hold more paint. If you're painting a bigger army, 9 times out of 10 I use this, and obviously needles. And we've got some spare needles as well, which I use all the time. Phenomenal tool. I don't think I start a painting session without using this. And then another airbrush tool is the putty, which allows you to cover areas for a airbrushing thing. So if you have some area of a mini that you don't want airbrushed and you don't want a certain color on, you can use this sort of thing, and it's not the easiest to get out of the tin, but it doesn't leave residue on your mini. You can shape it however you want. It's, you know, you can give this to a kid to play with, they'd love it. But yeah, you put it in an area on the mini, spread it out, do however much you want, obviously, cover where you don't want painted, and lo and behold, you can airbrush your mini without having to worry about an area you finish painting. And then of course, more with the airbrush stuff. If you're gonna have an airbrush, you want airbrush cleaner. Why would you not? You need to clean your airbrush. This stuff, again, you can get off Amazon. I'll check the price on screen. Literally every time. I've used absolutely loads of it recently. You might be able to see the level that was full about 2 weeks ago. So, you know, you use quite a bit of it, but it's not too expensive. And you need, if you spend a lot on an airbrush, you want to keep it clean. Flow improver, which is good for watering down your paints, or thinning them, I probably should say. And I've also got some Liquitex airbrush thinner, so, you know, to thin the paints down. I use this for any sort of acrylic. If I want it to be watered down and it's an acrylic, that I chuck in. And this is for if the paint is getting really sticky in the airbrush, because it's a lot more sort of, I don't know how to put it, like viscous, and helps oil the airbrush a bit more. Might be the best way to put it. But yeah, that's useful to have as well. Not horrendously expensive, but again, if you've got an airbrush, you want to be having this sort of thing. And last of all in this bundle of stuff is IPA. Now, this can be used as a tool for painting. I've not yet done it because it is brilliantly good at stripping paint, and I don't want to take a fully painted mini, try and do an effect, and mess up the paint job completely. But this is great. Strip minis, clean paint, clean your airbrush. You shouldn't dunk an airbrush in IPA because the IPA can, you know, mess with the valves and stuff like that. That's what the airbrush cleaner's for. However, if you run a quick bit of IPA through the airbrush needle, it can dissolve the paint if it gets stuck. And it's great. It's a lot cheaper than airbrush cleaner as well. So any parts that don't have rubber seals on, like the airbrush pots, you can chuck in IPA, give it a clean, and it's a lot cheaper than using a pot of this to do it with. I think I bought a 5 litre tub for about £10. I'll try and chuck the link on Amazon again. It's not very expensive. And if you've got a mini that you don't like, dunk it in this for however long you think it takes. Whack out the scrubby toothbrush, and you can clean a mini and repaint it again. But the toothbrush is really good there for getting into the crevices, because stripping minis is not the easiest process. And doing it well so that you don't mess up your next paint job is not, you know, you want to do it well so that you don't mess up your next paint job. Basing materials. This is going to be one where, again, this is probably more important than an airbrush, so I might rearrange where this is in the video, but I'm no editor, so that's why you're hearing this. Snow effects, I absolutely love them. I'll chuck some images on screen of what I've done with snow effects. This is by far the best snow effect you can buy, or that I've found that you can buy, I should say. There might be some phenomenal thing out there. I've got the Citadel Valhalla Blizzard. I think I've got 3 pots of it, actually, because I did a Space Wolf commission, which made me use a lot of this. However, when I found out about this, I used this to paint, I think it's Logan Grimnar, the guy on the big sleigh thing with the wolves in front. This was it. It is an absolutely phenomenal snow basing texture. If I can, okay, right, well, that's not helpful. There we go. It looks like that. As I said, with the acrylic medium, this is acrylic. I've watered this down so it's a little bit more viscous and easier to spread on. And you can use water to water it down more to get a better effect, and let it smooth out into the gaps. This is phenomenal stuff for any snow basing. And then Muddy Ground, which is what I've used for this. This has had a couple colours dry brushed onto it, but it does obviously look muddy. I'm going to airbrush some gloss onto it to make it look proper wet. or properly wet, I should say. But yeah, this is good so far. This is the only time I've used it, but I will probably use it on a couple of other minis just to give it a test. And if you want to have a look what AK Muddy Ground looks like, it looks like that. Not the nicest look. I imagine this is what some people's toilets might look like after you've had a nice Indian. But it is a great texture, if I could hold it the right way up. I like that one as well. And with the snow effects, because I was really enjoying snow bases at the time, I got the ice sparkles and snow micro balloons. I believe there is snow sprinkles is the other one, which I don't have. I'd like to get because it's good for slush. However, snow micro balloons looks very fluffy, good for fresh snow. What I do is I chuck that on a base, sprinkle this on top, looks like good fresh snow. And then ice sparkles is great for sort of frost effects and making snow sort of sprinkle and sparkle, as it says in the name. You get more than you probably would ever need for like 10,000 points of an army with these. I mean, you'd struggle to use all of it. So they're good value for money. And the AK diorama stuff, I am a big fan of. And again, it's something, you know, you want to make your bases look good. Black bases are just a bit bleh. So this is gloss and matte varnish. Two great things. Varnishing your minis makes paint jobs come together very, very well. Matte varnish is very, very good. I haven't yet used gloss varnish. Obviously I got ultra matte because if I'm looking for a matte effect, there's a lorry going past my house, which you might be able to hear. Yeah, if you're looking for a matte effect, ultra matte's going to be what you want. I don't want half a matte effect. So yeah, I got ultra matte. Great for bringing a paint scheme together. And then gloss varnish, any bug mouths, tyranids, orc mouths, something you want to look sort of slushy. As I said, I'm going to try to do it over here to make this look wet. Anything you want slushy, shiny, gloss varnish, obviously, gloss effect, you know, self-explanatory what that does. And then you've also got kitchen roll, because you want something to wipe your brush on. This is self-explanatory. You have it in your house. If you don't have it in your house, you're weird. Toilet roll works the same. It's good. It soaks up water. It's what it's there to do. Use it to clean your brush, dry your brush off for dry brushing. It's, you know what it is. It's good for using it. You know how you're going to use it. What you do is you dip your brush. When you've cleaned it, you use the kitchen towel to soak up the excess water on the brush. Right, and for the final stuff, basing materials. Obviously, I've got quite a lot. I've been doing it for a while. This is just bark chips. I think, honestly, my grandmother picked me up these from like a garden shop when she was just there. And, I mean, this was years ago. And you never, like, one of these per base is pretty much enough if you're actually playing the game. A couple works pretty well for sort of natural looking stuff. And they're really good for rocks, just base coat and black, dry brush grey. You've got a realistic looking stone. They're very useful. If I could hold on to the lid. So I've got loads of these, use them very frequently. And secondarily, again, this is all sort of just stuff that's nice to have for basing, definitely not a complete requirement. I've got cork sheet that I put through a blender. This is just more coarse stone. You can use that with sand. But yeah, this is just cork sheet I put through a blender to get some more sort of unique shapes. And obviously with just normal cork sheet, you can sort of create it yourself with a knife and pulling it apart basically. Great for smaller bases, and obviously, you can make larger rocks by just gluing it together. And then, I mean, everyone's favourite, a pot of sand. In fact, I'll check that in there, considering it's a similar medium. But yeah, sand, great for, I mean, even just not for sandy bases. You can use it for any sort of just texture on the base. I don't want to sand on my fucking hand. I don't want doing that. But yeah, you can use it for any sort of texture base. It's good to just get a bit of a more interesting thing than just a flat bit of nothing, really. And then obviously I've got some grass tufts from the old ways from the Warhammer shops. But yeah, grass tufts, they're good. I like them, but if you're using more than like sort of 3 or 4, they start becoming a little bit too uniform. So they're great for small bases, but I wouldn't use this for like a big diorama, because you're going to start just seeing the fact that they're all just very similar shapes or very similar tufts, unless you stick them all together. I do in fact have some, sorry for the noise there, some of the very, very old grass flock. This stuff I mean, it's not amazing, but it works. I mean, I've had it for ages, and I used to do all my old bases with that and just some PVA. If I can open it, Jesus Christ. Ugh. Don't want to get it everywhere, but yeah. You used to just chuck a base in there and get it everywhere. But yeah, this stuff is tried and tested. But yeah, oh God, it gets everywhere. As you can see, that's not coming off my fingers. Lovely. Right. But yeah, that's sort of the end. Anything else, if you can think of anything that you might want to use for basing, or not basing, just in general across the hobby, feel free to leave it in the comments if I've missed anything. I might make a second video in case anyone has thought of something that I've missed and there's enough of it to make a video off of. But yeah, so this is just my first YouTube video, so the format might be a bit dodgy, my editing will be dodgy. I'm by no means a long form editor, so I'm just hoping it, works well. And if anyone sees these videos and it helps them, then I'm happy to help. Ask questions in the comments if you feel like it. And as everyone on YouTube says, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I do feel like a bit of a dick saying that, but it does help, especially considering this is the first video on the channel. The support would be pretty nice. But yeah, till next time.